And the next case study is Tencent. Tencent is the gaming giant that has games like Honor of the Kings, PUBG Mobile, right? And this is their internal big analytics platform that does a lot of the, say, the user behavior analytics, log analysis on those games just mentioned, right? Before they had a crazy, insanely complex system with many tools in it, right? So data was scattered between all kinds of places, and they had a separated real-time and batch analytics pipeline, um, like a Lambda architecture, right? So there are two pipelines for them to maintain at the same time, and that's costly, right? And also the pipelines are extremely long because everything needs to be pre-computed, right, on all of the data. That's including denormalization and pre-aggregation. They didn't like that, so they revamped their data architecture, right? So they unified all of their workloads and their data on top of one data lakehouse, right? And data can be ingested. So how they does is they have a real-time pipeline and a batch pipeline, right? So the real-time pipeline gets ingested into StarRocks storage engine first, and then periodically synced to Iceberg, to Apache Iceberg, right, to keep the single source of truth data on their object store, right, to complete the data lakehouse, right? And batch data is ingested into Iceberg, Apache Iceberg directly. And by doing this, they effectively lowering their storage cost by 15%. And that's a combination of, using object storage, and eliminating a lot of the pre-aggregations and uh, denormalizations, right? And all of the pre-aggregations are eliminated because StarRocks is really good at performing aggregated queries, and as well as a lot of the denormalization pipelines, right? A simplified architecture means that they experience a 50% better efficiency when they add a new data pipeline, right? When they add something new, basically.